Hey, what's up, Teresa and other people out there that might tune into this? I just want to make a quick video in response to the comment that Teresa shared because I think not just for Teresa but for others, this echoes like kind of like a what if? Like, do we really know if these events actually happened, or is it just like a giant conspiracy theory that like some popes in the Middle Ages make made up to have an excuse for their desire to rule over people and be able to justify it by a historical event? You know, did these events really happen? And I try to work from a position assuming that that your question is is genuine and is honest and is like just genuinely expressing some doubts, not from I'm not gonna assume that it's you're just like trying to fight. So I'm gonna answer you like as respectfully and genuinely and honestly as I can. I will say this as a disclaimer out there, for anybody that's watching this. I think just from a psychology perspective, the biggest bias that every person comes to the table with is what I call self justification bias. And that is, we naturally gravitate toward whatever viewpoint helps us justify our preferred way of living. Religious people do this, and non religious people do this. We gravitate toward whatever worldview helps justify our preferred way of living, the way we want to live. We start with that, and then we try to build a worldview that helps protect that and make us feel like we're living right, and those other people, well, what? So every person does this. It is the most powerful bias, I think, on the planet, and particularly when it comes to matters of the major questions of life. Who we are, how we got here, is there a purpose, is there a higher power, do I have responsibility to someone else, how do I process my own ethics, my own feelings of guilt, or my own sense of like control, and how do I handle claims made by people. So I throw that out there as a disclaimer. We all have that bias. It's the biggest bias to be aware of. The best thing we can do is just try to follow data. So now, having said that, I do have some credentials to speak to this field, but I'm going to show you just primary source data. That's all that this is going to be about, is data. What does the data support believing? So I do have a master's degree in this field, as well as a bachelor's degree in applied linguistics. I have proficiency in Greek and Hebrew, as well as moderate level in Latin. And so I can read these sources that I'm going to refer to, these first century non-Christian historians who write very clearly that there was a Jesus who was executed under Governor Pilate during the reign of Tiberius Caesar in the Levant region, particularly in Jerusalem. Not only that, but we can narrow down the window of time to two dates, 3 years apart. One in Passover 30 AD and the other Passover 33 AD. And what you'll see is that data indicates that it is an accepted fact in the first century that Jesus of Nazareth was executed by crucifixion. The only questionable thing is, did he rise from the dead? And that would be another video that we're dependent only on the apostles and the people who saw him rise from the dead. And that is by far a more controversial question. Did he rise from the dead? Okay, that's what splits people. A person is not a Jesus follower until they've examined that evidence and crossed that bridge, right? But there would be no person that I'm aware of, no reputable first century historian who denied Jesus was executed. Okay, it would be similar to somebody in our century like denying that Martin Luther King was assassinated. Like nobody just does that. Yeah, there's conspiracy theories out there, or JFK, that maybe he's still alive out there. Maybe Princess Diana wasn't really killed. It was just a secret to get her out of the. But like there's always conspiracy theories. But if you want to know what mainstream historians believed in the first century, Jesus was executed. Okay, so we'll look at that data. But yeah, so I have a degree, 2 degrees in fields that both intersect with this. And actually, my professional specialty is exegesis, which is interpreting ancient texts by standard principles of interpreting any texts, including text messages that we send today in 2024. So that's my specialty is being able to read and decipher the natural meaning of texts. So all the texts that I'm going to refer you to, I can read in their original language and can verify for you. I have no bias, no desire to lie or to deceive you, but you could look these texts up yourself and find good English translations. In fact, I'll link you a document that gives the standard English translations for all the relevant documents. So here we go. We will use no evidence from people who believe Jesus rose from the dead because we don't need it. The fact that he died was accepted by everybody, even first century non-religious people. Even the Romans themselves who executed him according to their own records says, yeah, we killed him. We think it was a fake, claimed to be the king, a king of the Jews or whatever, a small little group of people in their empire in the big scheme of things. We killed him. Too much unrest. He was executed for treason. We know specifically why he was executed. So I don't need the Pope or any religious documents to tell me that, to be the basis for me believing that Jesus not only lived and was executed, and specifically was executed under the reign of Pilate during the exact years that I told you we can specify between 30 and 33 AD. And we actually know what day of history because it was on a Passover. At any rate, I could go into far, far more detail, getting it down to the exact day. We know 2 possible days. I could narrow it down to you, Teresa, when he was executed. That's just the only options that data leaves us. But I think your post was more related to just the general idea. Was there really a Jesus of Nazareth that was executed by crucifixion in the first century at all? Okay, so now let's get on the data. All right, let's start with Lucian of Samosata. All right, and I'm going to show you this right here. So this is the years he lived. So he wasn't first century historian. He was a second century satirist, writer. All right. But yeah, so this is, this is 2 generations or so after. And so this just gives you a flavor. This is a Roman, a writer who is not a Christian. Okay. He was not a Jesus follower. He did not believe Jesus rose from the dead. Okay. Now, so he writes a book about Christians, somewhat mocking Christians, right? So it's this person who converts, becomes a Jesus follower, and then abandons the Christian faith. But yeah, he refers to Christians as people who worship the man who was impaled in Palestine. That's the Israel region. He was impaled in Palestine because he introduced a new cult. Okay, and Lucian later describes, and it's with satire. He is not, okay, I hope you can I hope. Oh, wow, this is not working. Okay, sorry. Let me hide my webcam. Yeah. All right, here it is, Lucian of Samosata. All right. This is the name of the writing, The Passing of Peregrinus. Okay. And like I said, and you can see the quote, okay, the man who was impaled in Palestine. Impaled means stuck on, impaled. There's different ways of executing people in the ancient Near East, and impaling would be the general term that refers to both impaling someone on a sharpened stick, which a lot of groups did. I believe the Persians, that was their preferred method of execution. I think the Assyrians as well. Yeah, the Assyrians definitely, because I'm remembering wall reliefs that they carved themselves in their historical accounts, and which we still have today in the British Museum. At any rate, impaling was done, but it became more specific. The Romans impaled people by pinning them to 2 timbers of wood with iron spikes. It's tiny little ones we call nails, right? And so that would be the difference. But anyway, he's saying Lucian is not, again, he's not a Jesus follower. He would make fun of people who say Jesus is anything other than a whack job. Okay, but even Lucian is going to say, yeah, oh, they executed him for sure. Like, it's just a fact of history for Lucian. It wasn't even, listen to what he calls Christianity in general. He calls it the religion of people that worship that crucified sophist, right? Sophist is like a teacher and living under his laws, all right? So, yeah, these references acknowledge Jesus died by crucifixion, his Palestinian origin, and how he started a new faith, all right? Look at this. This is when he lived, 115 to 200 AD. All right, this is not some pope in the Middle Ages. All right, this is a Roman writer who was not a Jesus follower and never became one, saying, oh, it's a fake religion for sure. And it was started by a dude who got executed, all right, in the 1st century, all right, who lived in the Jerusalem region. All right, that's Lucian of Samosata. All right, so that's one. Here we go. The list keeps coming. And you can look this, all this stuff is documented, all right? I'm showing you. It's the passing of Peregrinus. You can look it up, read it by Lucian of Samosata. All right, just pause the video, write this guy down, check it out. Don't believe anything I say if it doesn't line up with data. All right, next let's go on to Thales. All right, this was a historian. He wrote, look at this, 52 AD. All right, this is facts. Like, look them up on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a great source for verifying any non-controversial information. When it comes to the Bible, Wikipedia just repeatedly will roast the Bible and say, oh, most scholars today, now that's their famous term, most scholars today agree that none of this stuff most scholars today, and then like they don't list any scholars, and I go in and change it and list all the scholars that do, and then somebody in Ohio codes it and blocks me out from editing, even though I have degrees in the field, and he's just better at coding than I am. So, Wikipedia, literally anybody can edit. So what I'm saying is Wikipedia is not a Christian-friendly source of data, all right? But everything I say, you can verify on that, right? So Lucian of Samosata. Next, let's go Thales, Roman historian, 1st century, okay? Like literally the generation right after Jesus, all right? That's when he wrote. I mean, so he was living during this period. He wrote 52 AD. You have to look up. I don't remember his exact years of living. We can look it up together right now if you want. All right. Okay, Roman historian Thales. Let's find exact. All right, 50 to 70. No, that can't be right. Let's see. Thales. Let's go Wikipedia. All right, let's see. He wrote a 3-volume history. 60th Olympiad. Okay. Most of his works. Thales' writings are dated to around 50. Oh, so we don't really have his exact period of life. All right, 50 AD is when he was writing. So just use your imagination for his years of life. But that's when he was writing. He was writing 15 years after Jesus' execution. Super close to the time, right? That'd be like somebody writing on Martin Luther King's execution, which was 1968, in like the early 80s, 15 years later. All right, so this dude's really close to the time frame. All right, let's see what he says. Now, I think Thales just, he's actually, so Thales wrote that there was, Thales wrote that Jesus was, the day that he was crucified, there was a solar eclipse, which is, it's super cool. We could get into it because there's astronomers who, they have all the solar eclipses in history now, like, identified when they have, because science is super strong right now. And there was one 33 AD, April, on Passover 33 AD, which is actually part of the reason I lean toward that particular day he was executed. But as I said, there's 2 possible days he was executed. One was Passover Day, Friday morning, 30 AD, or Passover Friday morning, 33 AD. Those are the 2 options. I lean toward the 33 AD because we have a verifiable solar eclipse that was visible in the Levant region, the Palestine region, on that Passover during the middle of the day. Okay, it's a fact of history. But at any rate, these dudes are writing in the first few centuries. The stuff I'm talking about was like Yale astronomers at But I can show you the articles for that. PhD astronomers that tell, yep, there was an eclipse this day, a solar eclipse. But anyway, Thales, he's debating with Julius. So not really debating because they lived in different generations, but Thales wrote that there was a solar eclipse the day Jesus was executed. All right, he's a Roman historian. He does not believe Jesus rose from the dead. He's just saying it's interesting there was an eclipse the day he died. Okay, Africanus writes 230 AD saying Thales is bogus. There was no solar eclipse on the day that Jesus died because Jesus was executed on a Passover, which there was a time of the full moon. There's no possible way you could have a solar eclipse at that time. So these are two dudes, two early century writers debating with each other. Both of them agree, he was executed on Passover. They just are debating whether there was a solar eclipse. Neither one of them is a Christian, Teresa. You understand? So if anyone wanted to have an easier way to dismiss Jesus' execution, these dudes would just be like, oh, it just didn't happen, right? But they're not doing that because they couldn't do that because they knew it happened. It was an established fact of history. Okay, let's go on. Here's somebody you might have heard of, Pliny the Younger. I mean, maybe you didn't hear of Lucian of Samosata or Thales, but and here I'm thinking I have this thing pulled up. I don't. All right, here's the Thales. He debates with, or Julius Africanus writes a couple centuries later and says, Thales was wrong. There's no solar eclipse that day. Not possible on a Passover. Okay, so again, this confirms just not only that Jesus was executed, but that it was on a Passover, which is the Jewish holiday celebrated in March or April every year on a Friday. All right, same event that happens tomorrow. Tomorrow is Passover. All Jews all around the world, even non-Jesus following Jews, which is most of them, will be celebrating Passover. All right, so see how Thales' account just corroborates. Hey, this dude was killed. It was on a Passover, and some people said there was a solar eclipse. Some first century historians said there was an eclipse this day. Julius Africanus says, there wasn't no eclipse that day. Couldn't be. It'd be impossible. All right, but at any rate. So let's go on. Pliny the Younger. All right. This dude was a politician. All right. Proconsul is kind of like a governor. And he was in Asia Minor, which is today Turkey. All right. And he was writing to the emperor, Emperor Trajan. Okay. There we go. Make sure I still got this on. Good. Yeah. Saying, that Christians were gathering before dawn to chant hymns to Christ and to partake of a meal together. He was basically writing how to handle Christians in his region of the empire. Doesn't really talk about the execution of Jesus, so we should just skip him. All right, Marabar Serapion. All right, basically, right here, he's a philosopher. So he's not a Roman historian, he's a philosopher, writing around 73 AD. Says, here's his exact quote, English translation, of course, because he would have been writing in Latin, and I will spare you that. But if you want it, let me know. I will send the Latin to you, and you can read it for yourself to make sure that scholars around the world aren't mistranslating it to try to trick you. All right. For what advantage, this is Marabar Serapion writing, what advantage did the Jews gain by the death of their wise king? Okay. The letter goes on and says that it was just after the execution of their king that the kingdom of the Jews was abolished and they were ruined and driven from the land. The letter also claims, nor did the wise king die for any good reason. Oh, sorry, he didn't die permanently. He lived on in their teachings. The letter describes the execution of Jesus at the instigation of the Jews sometime not long before the fall of Jerusalem, which was 70 AD. Okay, he's writing 73 AD. All right, so again, this is another Roman writer in the first century, Teresa, who's not a Jesus follower, who would say the resurrection is bogus. But you say, yeah, the dude was executed, for sure. All right, let's go on. All right, we got another Roman historian, Suetonius, all right, 120 AD, who reports, and sorry for the backdrop here. My wife's taking a nap in my room, so I'm in my son's room, which is also our storage room. So it is what it is. Suetonius writes that Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome, instigated the Jews who were instigated, it means they were fighting about a person named Chrestus, and never ceased to cause unrest, all right? It's the whole reason he got executed. Too much drama around this dude, Jesus. This expulsion is probably the expulsion of the year 49 AD mentioned in Acts 18:2. Suetonius seems to have confused the name Chrestus with Christus, a Greek term that meant chosen one. All right. Suetonius also assumed that Jesus was alive and in Rome. All right. He probably made this assumption because it's unusual for people to have the kind of devotion for a dead or distant figure of Christians. Okay. That was not as helpful at corroborating the execution of Jesus. Just the existence of followers of Jesus at this point, and Jewish people having a lot of drama between themselves about him. So, all right, let's go on to Tacitus, who is probably the creme de la creme, Teresa. So Tacitus is probably one of the most famous Roman historians that there is. All right, he wrote his book Annals in the early 2nd century, so early 100s. Okay, he covers the history of Rome, which is the period between 14 and 68 AD. Let me put on the thing. I'm sorry, I thought that was on. All right. So here you go. Tacitus is his name. If you want to look him up on Wikipedia. All right. But unfortunately, the part of his history that takes place during the year Jesus was executed is lost. But later, the fire event where Emperor Nero, here, let me put the webcam on. So Nero was very eccentric. He was a very eccentric Roman emperor. You can study him. See, he had people in his family killed. I think he has mom killed. He had one of his wives killed, maybe two of his wives. A son killed, I believe. You got to look him up because it's getting fuzzy because Herod was also crazy, one of the Herods, and killed similar people, and I get them crossed in my brains. 1st century paranoid rulers were not uncommon. Okay, but Nero basically blamed the burning of Rome. Most scholars think Nero probably set fire to Rome because he wanted to rebuild it, and people didn't want to let him do it, so he set it on fire, and they burned. Oh, I got to rebuild it now. So sad. And he burned it on Christians and actually used them as torches during a party that he celebrated once it was rebuilt. Like literally, he had executed Christians, impaled on poles and made into tiki lamps, and they were lit human beings on top of poles that would line the walkway into his celebration. Anyway, Nero, kind of crazy. All right. But anyway, when Tacitus is writing about Nero, and I'll switch back over, and his burning of Rome, and this is where he starts. He says, to squelch the rumor that Nero set the fire himself, Nero created scapegoats. This is a Roman historian kind of roasting a leader who could not hurt him anymore because he was dead. Okay. All right. He says, yeah, Nero made scapegoats and tortured them. People called Christians, a group hated for their abominable crimes. Okay. Their name comes from Christ, who, during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, who's one of the Caesars, you can look him up. I think his reign was 14 to 37 AD. Christ was executed. See that? During the reign of, this was the president, this was the governor of the region, Pilate. Okay? Pilatus. Okay. Suppressed for the moment, the deadly superstition broke out again, not just in Judea, the land which originated this evil, but also in the city of Rome, where all sorts of horrendous and shameful practices of every part of the world converge and are freely cultivated. All right? So you see what Tacitus is saying? He's saying Christianity is an evil practice. All right? And it all started, this dude named Christ that got executed under Pontius Pilate a few years back. Okay? And he gives a specific window of time. Okay, you got the reign of Tiberius Caesar, and then he narrows it down further to the reign of Pilate, who was only governor for I don't know. Tiberius was president for 17 to 38 is what's coming to mind, so 21 years. And Pontius Pilate was only governor of the Israel region called Judea. Governor's not even the proper term, but just allow me some grace. He was a prefect. Anyway, I don't want to go into that. But he was in charge. He was a governor basically for only 6 years out of that 21 at Tiberius. So that narrows down when the execution happened to only a 6-year window. And then we can use other sources, Teresa, and I won't bore you with to narrow it down even more fully. But okay, I'm going on 24 minutes. Again, every source that I've given you, not a single one of them believe Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday. But all of them acknowledge that it's a fact of history. Jesus was executed. Not only executed by crucifixion under the Roman Caesar Tiberius, and more specifically under the governor of the sub-region where he was executed, Pilate, and that sub-region was the Judea region. Okay, that's the data. I've shown it to you. I can email it to you if it's important to you. It should be this every person in the world should be interested in investigating this. Okay. So I hope that's helpful, and not just to Teresa, but to other people out there who, she was just the one being honest. Like, yeah, we don't really know. Like, they say he died there, right? This they, So I appreciate your bravery, your honesty, just expressing, like, honestly, I don't know if any of that stuff happened. All I know is some people say that, most likely religious people that, you've heard about or been in contact with. But hopefully this shows you, look, there's actually it's far, far more reasonable to believe that Jesus died by crucifixion than it is to doubt it. I don't know any reputable historians in the first century or in the second century who denied the execution of Jesus. They just didn't do that. Even to this day, because the data is just so strong. Like most historians you find today, I don't know. People do get wonky with Jesus, even really good historians. And I think that's because of self-justification bias. Because the claims Jesus made honestly shake people personally, they don't want it to. And so they create bubbles of protection from Jesus. Whoop. And they'll even become less faithful with the data on this particular sub part when it comes to Jesus than they will with other data that doesn't really affect their worldview because of that such self-justification bias. But I've shown you a list of non-Christian Roman historians who corroborate the execution of Jesus. I could give you another list of non-Christian Jews from the 1st and 2nd century who write about Jesus' execution. If you're interested in that, let me know. All right? Basically, everybody believed in the execution of Jesus. Okay? And the far more common thing, where you're going to find a lot more people on your side, Teresa, is, did Jesus rise from the dead? Now, for that, I still think the evidence is far, far stronger to believe yes, which is why I'm a Jesus follower, against my will, against a different part of my will that wants to be my own boss and doesn't like calling anybody my master, let alone taking orders from any person. So I got that part of me too, all right? But, we have at least 5 independent, sworn, written out eyewitness statements from people in the 1st century who were reasonably trustworthy people from everything else we know about their life and their writings, who had no motivation on this to lie, who lost and suffered, who said, yeah, I saw the dude alive again. I saw him alive. Matter of fact, I will put in JPEG form just 4 of them, just because it's so easy. I got them saved to my computer. You could see 4 copies of writings by 1st century people who were eyewitnesses, who hung out with Jesus and said, yeah, I saw the dude alive after he died. One's written by a dude named Peter, the famous one, who the Catholics say is the first pope. Not going to go there, but even Christians who don't think he was the first pope, everybody agrees he was a Jesus follower during the 1st century. Just fact of history. But he says point blank and wrote it out, yeah, he rose from the dead. All right, Matthew, 1st century Jesus followers, yep, he rose from the dead, I saw him. John, Paul of Tarsus, who was a Jewish extremist, anti-Christian extremist who had Christians rounded up and executed. Okay, now he changed his mind because he's like, and then I saw Jesus and realized I was a murderer. Whoops. Turns out he is alive. Whoops. And Paul writes stuff he did when he didn't know better. He didn't try to hide it. He had a young dude executed. Okay. And then Paul himself got arrested by Rome multiple times, beaten, told to change his story. It was like, can't. Kind of saw the dude alive. Is what it is. He used the whole rest of his life walking around the Roman Empire spreading that message. And the empire changed a lot, not unrelated to Paul's single-handed efforts. So it's a fact of history. Just his writings are so well documented, his travels, everything's documented, even by people other than him. So Peter, Matthew, John, Paul, and then Jesus' younger brother James, who was not a Jesus believer during his lifetime, mocked him, grew up with Jesus. Jesus was his older brother, right? Mocked him his whole life. And then Jesus had 3 brothers who did the same. And then after Jesus' resurrection, all 3 of them turned. Jude, another one of his little brothers, James, and James writes a letter and acknowledges Jesus rose from the dead. It says, I saw him too. He appeared to me, and I realized I was a scumbag my whole life making fun of this kid. And I was wrong. And all these guys died. Okay, well, not all. We don't know all of them died. Let me be careful with my words. Matthew, we don't know what happened to him. Okay, but we know he suffered. All right. John spent his whole life watching everybody die. His little brother was the first executed for saying, his little brother James, different James, wrote that believed that Jesus rose from the dead and was telling people, and they killed him. John watched his little brother get killed. All right. So, well, I don't know if he was there for the execution, but 44 AD, his little brother got killed. John didn't change his story. As an old man, like 80, 90 years old, they put him exiled him to a penal colony in the Mediterranean called Patmos. All right. So he's in a prison as an old man. That's when he wrote the book of Revelation. Anyway, Peter got arrested. It's 65 AD. Look it up. And got crucified. Okay. The Romans crucified him because he wouldn't change his story. He saw Jesus alive. Paul got beheaded under Nero, that crazy emperor I told you about. Caught Paul. Said, change your story. I'm not. I saw the dude alive. I'm going to kill you. Go ahead, do what you need to do. And he killed him. It's a fact of history. Okay? Now, is it a fact of history Jesus rose from the dead? No, it's not. It's a fact based on logic. Eyewitness testimony from reliable sources. Let me say this carefully. Multiple independent eyewitness testimony from reliable people, plus the greater unreasonableness of any other alternative explanation you could possibly come up with, Teresa. Like one explanation would be they were lying. Okay, let's probe that. What would their motive be? People will lie if they get something out of it. Not usually if they're going to be killed and they know they're not going to heaven because there's not a heaven because they made up that Jesus rose from the dead and they know he didn't rise from the dead. People don't usually lie for a lie that people don't usually suffer and die for a lie that they know is wrong. Does that make sense? Humans don't do that. All right. It's a very easy lie detector test. Right. Put a sword to someone's neck. And if they're like, do it, man, you know they're telling the truth. These dudes did. I mean, that's why Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician who invented the whole field of probability, was like, I tend to believe people who are willing to get their heads cut off for what they believe. I generally believe they're being genuine, and when they say they believe, it's like, yeah, you think. So I would say there's the resurrection of Jesus is established by logic and data plus logic. The execution of Jesus, which is what we're talking about and what my post is about, is established by historical fact. It just is what it is. Okay, I hope that's helpful on your journey. More, like you can ask questions about anything. I will not push. This is what I do. I do one video, I drop seeds, and I back away. If you're interested, you want to see data on anything for the resurrection of Jesus, I could gladly show you the data, walk you through it. Okay, we still have copies of the eyewitness accounts of all 5 of those guys that I mentioned. They're in museums. You can read them for yourself. Like they're 1900 years old. Okay. So, all right. Hope that's helpful. Yeah. I just wish you well in your quest for the truth. Thank you for being brave enough to throw that out there. So I appreciate you. All right. Bye.